university, at the beginning of the semester, students were able to nominate and vote for a professor, faculty, or staff member who they would want to see present their hypothetical last lecture. Our speaker tonight is many things. He's got a PhD in philosophy and is an associate professor in Rowan's Philosophy and World Religions Department. He worked as an engineer for some years before pursuing his dream of getting a PhD in philosophy. And when he is not teaching, he enjoys building tree houses, hunting, fishing, planting trees, and spending lots of time outdoors. He's currently working on the philosophy of astronomy, the development of integrated history and the philosophy of science, the replication crisis in psychology, and the role of language in medical diagnosis. So please help me in welcoming our presenter this year, Dr. Matthew Lund.
All right. Thank you so much, Cece. I really appreciate it. And I'm very honored to be giving this last lecture. I'm happy that... Can you guys not hear me? Anyway, so I'm very honored to do this. I'm very glad that students thought that my story and my wisdom, if you could call it that, is worth hearing about. So I'm very grateful and humbled by it, and hopefully I will not disappoint you. This is a slide, sort of talks a little bit about my upbringing. This is actually written by a Norwegian-American philosopher from Minnesota, like myself. And he says, having grown up in Minnesota in the kind of mainly Scandinavian-American community Garrison Keillor has made familiar, I'm temperamentally reluctant to write about myself. Who does he think he is? I can almost hear a Minnesotan say. So for the Minnesotans in the audience, you can relate to this. And so I'm a little worried that I might be a bit too self-indulgent going deep into who I am and all the rest of it. So I hope you'll pardon me that. I am serious about this, though. I feel I'll go to conferences and I'll talk to my peers and I'll talk about philosophical things, and I kind of know what to expect and they know what to expect. And I'm used to that. But this makes me a little bit more nervous because I have to sort of present myself as a human being, and that's always frightening to do. And I hope that I don't disappoint you. In many ways, I think this is the most important talk I'll give because it's addressing something more fundamentally human than what the average philosophy talk is. So, so while I still wish I could win the Nobel Prize in philosophy, I have to admit that this is probably not possible, if for no other reason other than that there is no Nobel Prize in philosophy. Okay, so now I'll get to the point here. So this is the last lecture, and it's based on actually it existed before Randy Pausch, but he made it famous because he literally was giving a last lecture. But fortunately, I'm quite healthy and I have no problems like this, which is a great thing. But I'm going to take the opportunity and take the idea seriously that what this is about is saying all the things that you feel like should be said, but for whatever reason can't be said, things that people can't talk about, maybe things that are very personal, things that are deeply meaningful. So those are the kinds of things I want to discuss. So I want to tell the truth. That's my hope. But I also want to be interesting. So we'll see how I do with that. And I have here a picture of Friedrich Nietzsche, one of my favorite philosophers, although I don't endorse his views, if you're worried about that. I once had somebody come up to me and say, "Do you believe Nietzsche?" And he got really angry when I responded that I find him interesting to read and compelling, but I'm not in the business of believing people, really. So anyway, Nietzsche had this idea that the truth was ugly, that this is something we actually have to learn how to accept in order to live our lives, and that this is a difficult kind of challenge. People might want to sugarcoat the truth and avoid it. So hopefully I can say some interesting things about all of this. So as was mentioned in the intro, I teach philosophy. And so I'm lucky. I get to teach something that people love. There's all kinds of people who want to get PhDs in philosophy. The market is kind of flooded with them. Lots of people say, I wish I could go back and get that philosophy degree. That doesn't happen quite so much with accounting or other kinds of degrees. Lots of people love the field and they want to talk about all these things. And fortunately, I get to do it every day. I get paid to do it, which is nice. So philosophy is always in fashion with the right kind of people, as I say, and it's usually out of fashion with the other kind. And so that's good. People self-select and they come and talk to me, and I'm very grateful for this. I get to talk about the things that people stay up till 3 a.m. talking about when they're students. I did this myself, so I have some experience with it, but I get to talk about this every day, so I'm very fortunate in this regard. I also get to talk about things that aren't uplifting. In a lot of ways, our academic study it kind of has a progressive sort of glaze on it, that all the things we learn are going to be helping humanity somehow get somewhere better. And philosophy is one of the few fields where you sort of engage with this existential crisis that we're actually in. What's going to happen to all of us, each of us individually? What's going to happen to the place that we live and enjoy now? These are questions that philosophers talk about. So I get to do that. When I teach, sometimes students will get fascinated with the subject matter, and they'll make a mistake and think that I'm fascinating, which is not so. It's kind of a displacement. And they'll ask me, like, what do you really think about all this stuff? And I don't like to talk about it because I don't want to prejudice them in one direction over another. I like to be objective. And if they push me for a while, I'll say, you don't want me to tell you because you'll probably be disappointed when you hear what I actually believe. So tonight you can prepare to be disappointed. So I'm going to talk about this. Okay. So these are some, I'm sort of going to turn the Pauschian idea on its head a little bit. He talks about it really achieving your childhood dreams. I'm going to focus a bit on what I consider childhood delusions. And so I'm from Bemidji, Minnesota. You can tell I'm wearing my Scandinavian uniform to show what kind of person I am. And this is Paul and Babe, which is the most famous visual from my hometown of Bemidji, Minnesota. So I'll talk about this in just a second. But here are some delusions of childhood that I believed, and parts of me still believe, but the more rational part of me recognizes that they're false. So here's one. Everyone likes you. You might be having evidence that this is not true in my case right now. So far in my talk, we'll see. But yes, when you're growing up, you think that everybody likes you and they have your best interest at heart, and then you find sometimes, sadly, that's not so. It's a hard thing to accept. Here's another one. The idea that the world is a just and fair place. We'd like to believe this. This is sort of an assumption we might make, but sadly, there's overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So that's something at some point you kind of have to give up, or you have to at least hold on to it in a more complex way later on in life. Things happen for a reason. This is something people like to say. It's comforting. You think that everything, there might be a silver lining to every cloud, and you can make a silk pillow out of a sow's ear, but I don't think that's really true. I think there are lots of cases where things happen that are just plain bad. And we could talk about a lot of contemporary phenomena or history or whatever, but I don't think I need to convince you of this one. Here's another one, that the world and humanity will endure forever. These little problems, these buffets of fate will go away, and things will be better, and it'll sustain, and the human pageant will march on. Sadly, that one's also not true. Maybe you thought Paul and Babe were worth all the hype. Also not true, sad. As someone from Bemidji, I can tell you they're vastly overrated. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about myself, where I come from. I've already said a few words. One of the things that was fun about this whole project was I got to look at a lot of old pictures of myself. I grew up in northern Minnesota, a very different kind of world. A lot of passive-aggressive Midwesterners who communicate very differently from people on the East Coast. I grew up around a lot of snow. There's a picture of me, and in the center over here, I'll talk about my father was actually a professor of philosophy at Bemidji State University, a very well-known and distinguished university that no one's ever heard of. And we moved to Bemidji when I was 1.5, and we moved into a house that didn't have any insulation and it wasn't finished. And so we used electric heat for about a month until my dad got the bill, and then he said, enough of that. And so we didn't have heat. So if you look at the picture, he's sitting there studying his notes, and my brother and I are in snowsuits under blankets. And this is the reason why I'm sort of immune to the cold to this day. That's how I grew up. Lots of outdoor activities, and I very much enjoy all of that. I miss it being on the East Coast and being in a place that's so urban and developed and so on. So I had this upbringing. It was rather nice being out in the country. I enjoyed all this. My father was somebody who grew up on a farm, so we actually had a farm that we would go to. He was a tree farmer, so I spent countless hours out in the woods. He would carry a bucket and plant trees, and my job was to slap all the mosquitoes off his back as they bit him. And then when I got older, I could plant my own trees and have to handle my own mosquitoes. This picture in the middle of me, I had a big smile because I was so proud to be sitting on a tractor, and I thought that whoever saw the picture would really think that I was driving the tractor. So this was a great moment in my childhood. So anyway, in the bio that I wrote up, I talked about how I was a terrible student in high school. I was really not very impressive at all. And the guidance counselors came to me and told me that I'd be well suited to go into forestry or maybe join the military or go into some kind of blue collar career. And I couldn't get my act together. I didn't apply to any colleges. I didn't take the SAT. But my father was a faculty member at Bemidji State. So I figured if I showed up about 2 weeks before classes started, they'd let me in. And sadly, I was right. They did let me in. And I took these placement tests, and it turned out that I did much better than I had a right to do on the tests. And I got into the engineering program, which I was excited about it, although I had no idea what engineers did, but that's what my older brother was doing, who everybody looked up to, so I thought that was a good thing to do. So this is my beginnings of my engineering study, and when I started, if you told me that an engineer drove a train, I probably would have believed you. I had no idea what they did, and I actually didn't do particularly well to begin with. So here's a slide showing the old me in my Bemidji State days. And as I say, this is where I didn't make a name for myself. This is where I barely got out alive, actually. So when I went to college, I got a dorm room. I was able to pull some strings, and I got a dorm room. And the first night when I went to college, I did not wake up the next day in the dorm room. I actually woke up in the county jail. And I woke up and I had blood in my hair and pieces of broken glass and didn't know what happened. And it turned out that I had got extremely intoxicated, rolled my car over and destroyed it. This is a horrible, horrible event. It was a very hard thing to overcome. Had very severe head injury and had a hard time coping with things. I had a great job at Kmart. I used to go and push carts around. That night, I managed to come to work, and to my horror, where I had crashed my car and flipped it over, it was the yard of one of the two managers at Kmart. And so when I came in, the other manager came up to me, and this was a guy who nobody liked. He never smiled, and he came up to me with this huge grin on his face. And I thought, wow, what did I do to deserve this? And he said, we were all wondering how you were going to get here today. And then he started to laugh. And I thought, wow, I guess the word got around. This is great. And I had a very hard time coping with this. I felt very ashamed about it. Didn't do particularly well in school, although I did a lot better than I had a right to. And looking back on it, I can't say exactly what was wrong, but something was definitely wrong. It took me several years to overcome it. I'd like to say that I read Aristotle and I learned about the golden mean, and I learned about how you have to balance temperance. Temperance is a virtue between being a drunk and being a teetotal. But I never read that stuff at that time. But somehow or other, I kind of righted the ship and found my way to something better. So what was better for me was I ended up, despite all the difficulties I had at Bemidji, I ended up finding my way to the University of Minnesota, which was a very almost like paradise in many ways. It was a very large university. It was in a city. At Bemidji, despite my failings, I could do quite well, despite how badly I was managing myself. University of Minnesota, I had to get over all that, and I had to work a lot harder, and I had to realize that lots of people were a lot smarter and more capable than myself, and that was a pill to swallow, of many pills to swallow in those years. But I did end up getting my bachelor's in electrical engineering, which I was very proud of. It was a very good field to study. But more importantly for me, during the years I was at University of Minnesota, was I spent a lot of time in the library. These are images on the what would be your right side of the Walter Library at University of Minnesota. And I was just there a month ago, and I believe that the most charming part of the library is now gone. They used to have these areas they called the stacks, which were really low ceilings. And it was almost like walking around in a submarine, and you'd find a carrel to work in, and you'd turn on a little light bulb. And the carrel was decorated with the most vulgar graffiti imaginable. And you could go in there and you could read and just have this nice peace and quiet. And so it was during these years when I started reading a lot of literature. I have a number of books here of the many that moved me. And in a way, I started to realize that there was a lot more to study, a lot more of interest than just engineering. And so by the time I was getting done, I was thinking that maybe there was something more I could do. I was a little bit uncertain about what was going to lead to when I went into the world of engineering. A typical thing that happens at this point in the talk is I'll focus on professors who had a transformative impact on me. I can't do that. So, and it's not them, it's me in a lot of ways. So it just never seemed to happen to me. I never seemed to have people take me aside and say, you have something to offer, things, or, let's talk about this. It just didn't ever seem to occur. I had one thing that happened that I'll tell about that. It's a telling story, and I don't want to say it in a way that makes people sound like awful, miserable, degenerate scum, but it might come across that way. So I was taking an engineering course, and it was in a very large building. Electrical engineering had a huge, brand new building. And there was something in the lecture I didn't understand, and I saw the professor in the hallway. And I went up to him and I said, when you were talking about that Dirac delta function in this, and I started asking him a question, he said, hang on a second. And I stopped talking, and he said, can you come with me? And I said, sure. So we walked for about a quarter of a mile over to where his office was. And then he pointed at the door and he asked me if I could read what it said. And I said, yes. And he said, when does it say my office hours are? And it was like 2 days away. And I said this, and he said, what day is it now? I'm competent enough to know the day of the week. So I said what it was. And he said, okay, well, now you got that figured out. Went inside and shut the door. And so there was a lot of this. And so because of that, I never felt like I could engage with these people too well. So some of them might have been nicer than this guy. But anyway, those were bad stories. So when I teach at Rowan, I figure if I avoid doing that, I've got something going for me. So hopefully I'll never get the idea to do that to a student. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit about my career in engineering. Actually, my career in engineering also began with another horrible car wreck that when I was interviewing for this job at Ironwood Electronics, I was going to the second interview, and they'd moved from one place to another. And the roads, St. Paul suburbs, are kind of like New Jersey, where they decide to change the name of the road every quarter mile or so. And I took a left turn trying to get there. I was late. I got in a head-on collision. and I was wearing my suit, which was then all covered with blood and ripped the elbows and the knees out. And it turned out that it happened right in front of the picture window at the new location. And so a bunch of telephone repair guys were out there, and they said, you're really messed up. You have to come with us. And I said, can you guys just wait? I got an important appointment I have to go to. Just go in and take care of this. And so that also started very, very badly. But I worked in engineering. I enjoyed it. It was a very good job. The great thing I did at Rowan or at Ironwood was I published the parts catalog. This was my first publication. Doesn't have my name on it. I probably own the only copy extant of this, but this was what I did. So this was my first publication. And I didn't realize I had it until a couple days ago. So it's not that important to me. And you can see me in black and white here, appropriately enough. I felt like that was the way I existed during those years to a large degree. But it really was a very good profession. It was stimulating for a time. I greatly enjoyed it. But it was kind of repetitive, and I still read a lot of literature, read a lot of philosophy, had a lot of other things I was interested in at the time. So my wife Anne is in the audience here, and she was wanting to study for the GRE, and I'd been taking philosophy courses in the evening, and since she was studying and we were going to the library, I thought, well, maybe I'll also try to take the GRE too and see how it turns out. So I think a lot of things are like this where, it might be after I had my car accident on the first night of college, I might have said, that's enough of that. I'm going to turn over a new leaf. Never going to do that again. I don't know that things actually happen that way very often. That didn't happen. And when I decided to study philosophy, I didn't say, enough of all this. I'm going to quit, do something completely different. I took the GRE. I did better than I thought I'd do. I thought, if I'm ever going to apply, this would be the time. And I slowly, gradually sort of all of a sudden found myself in graduate school in philosophy. I wasn't making conscious, really deep decisions about any of this stuff. So, so that was how I eventually got to the world of philosophy. Now, you could say I did this because my father was a philosopher, and philosophers actually rarely pass down the philosophy gene to their offspring for whatever reason. So, I was conscious of this. I felt like I got to make my own way. If I do the same thing he's doing, that's giving up on everything. So I also had to figure out a way to make it make sense to myself at the time too. For better or for worse, I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago. These are some pictures that make it look like a really nice place, very cosmetic. It's actually one of the original campuses that was built with brutalist architecture, so they had to build all the riot-proof buildings so that you couldn't storm into the administration building unless your head was 4 inches or less in width. So it was very, very kind of an ugly place. But I was very happy to start teaching philosophy in particular. Again, I didn't form lifelong bonds with professors just like when I was an undergrad. For whatever reason, this didn't happen. Maybe it was me. But I remember the first day I went to run what we called a recitation section on a Friday when I had all the students come, and I remember looking through the little 4-inch window, and I was terrified. What am I going to talk to them about? And it was during this period when I really realized that I love teaching. There was something very stimulating about it. It was always a kind of a growing experience. I always learned things that I'd never thought of, new perspectives. So I came to really enjoy teaching during those years. And I managed to get my PhD in 6 years. And I was the only person to get a PhD in those 6 years. So there were lots of people who were there when I came, and they're still there when I left, and probably still there now. I don't know what happened to them. So I was lucky enough to get a tenure track job in philosophy, which is not easy to do. There's not many jobs. So I came to Rowan in 2004. So my daughter, Sophia, who's here in the audience, she was born in 2004, only a few months after I came to Rowan. I remember that the night she was born, I wrote up an exam and I emailed it to one of my colleagues to give to my students because I couldn't be there the next day, which was a foolish thing to do. But it was very difficult to balance being a parent with teaching. And I think in so many ways my view on things changed quite a bit from having children. And then in 2009, my son, Jason, who's the smaller one in the picture here, he was born. And then as Jason was being carried, I was writing this book on Nora Russell Hanson that I have here. So that was my first major publication. I'll talk a little bit about my academic work, but I don't want to get super deep into that either, but I want to say what I think is significant about it for the purpose of this talk. So in the last decade or so, I've started doing research that's sort of more in the history of science than in philosophy of science. And so I'm publishing works on the personal equation in observational astronomy from the late 18th century to the middle half of the 19th century primarily. And I think in all the works I've done, I've read things, I've been kind of annoyed by them, I've been mystified by them, and I've tried to understand what they were about, and I'll get some idea about what it is, and I'll think, well, that's different than what everybody says, so therefore it's incorrect. And then I'll look deeper and I'll realize that for some reason I actually have reason to dissent, and that I can marshal an argument for something that is new and interesting to me. So it's a means of self-expression. So I like this idea that Ralph Waldo Emerson had, that all the virtues are sort of encapsulated in self-trust. If you can be the kind of self you can trust, then you should do that. You should trust your insights, follow these things where they lead. So with regard to the personal equation, the way that this is typically discussed in all kinds of books on astronomy and psychology is people will mention this thing that happened where there were these observational differences, and then there was this corrective that came in and people corrected for it, and then that was the whole thing. And so you'll find the same 3 or 4 sentences replicated in hundreds of publications. And I got interested in this, and I ended up getting letters that the person, David Kinnebrook, who was fired for his bad observations, actually wrote, and found that he defended himself against all these charges that he was a terrible observer. These letters, they only emerged in 1985. Lots of people read them, but everybody who read them returned the same default story about the whole. So what I was very happy to discover was that there was a real story there that everybody had ignored. So I think that's typical in a way of what I find best about doing philosophical research is you might trust your own intuitions, trust your own perspective, and you find that you can argue for something new and original. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few life lessons. You might say, when I talked about my drunken car accident, that I fully established my credibility to tell you all kinds of things about life. So I'm embarrassed about this. This isn't something I talk about. But there are a few things I think I know, things I think are valuable to communicate. So here I have a quotation from the writings, it's the lives and opinions of the eminent philosophers by Diogenes Laertius, who's a very great gossipy writer about the philosophers. Almost everything he wrote was a fabrication. In fact, he said that Heraclitus, this great philosopher, was worried that he had an overbalance of certain wet spirits in his body, so he buried himself up to his neck in manure, and the manure pile spontaneously combusted, and he died. There's no other place where that's said. So that's typical of Diogenes Laertius' stories, but this one's rather good. So to a stripling who was talking nonsense, this is Zeno the Stoic, Zeno of Citium, he responded, the reason why we have two ears and only one mouth is that we may listen the more and talk the less. So this is a good lesson. And I often find that when I think back on my life, I don't remember whatever nonsense I was telling other people, but I can remember things they told me that I found moving and interesting and changed my direction about things. And so I take this very much to heart. I also I believe in this idea I associate with Quakerism, that each of us has a kind of inner light, inner consciousness that we live in, and that we believe we're doing the right thing. And when we don't do the right thing, in others' eyes, we have a way to explain it. We just can't quite communicate this. This is something I like to believe, even though I think it's probably empirically false. But I feel like it's something that it's good for us to believe and advocate for. But life is complicated. And I do think that all the ways that we might hate one another and vilify other people might be things we can avoid if we tried to listen a bit more and are sympathetic to other people's perspectives and things they're through, and that all of us are human, and we have these problems and errors in judgment and ability to control ourselves sometimes, and that our humanity is something that we should recognize in others, and hopefully they'll recognize it in us as well. So as Socrates said, knowing that you don't know things is the first step to being wise. So the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit about different sort of ways. So unless you're from the part of the world I'm from, this will all sound a little bit odd, but I grew up in northern Minnesota, which was had a very different racial backdrop than a lot of other parts of the country. So where I grew up in Bemidji, we had a number of Chippewa reservations around the town that I was in. And there was a lot of racism, but it wasn't the kind of racism that people talked about. This wasn't the kind of racism that was really highlighted, for example, in the civil rights movement. I mean, there certainly were Native American civil rights movements. And so I feel a great deal of shame for having lived in that environment and enjoyed a lot of privilege within it. And I had classmates who looked a little different from me. I didn't know that when they went home, they spoke another language that I knew nothing about. I didn't know what kind of traditions they had. And they had to hide all these things because the culture was hostile to them. And this really bothered me when I recognized it. Only years later, only when I left, did I realize how pervasive this kind of racism against the original people who were from this area was. And so these are some images that a friend I had from school sent me recently about the attempts at was called American Indian assimilation. This was really headquartered in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, about how they would try to destroy people's culture, what they looked like, how they dressed, the way that they lived. All these things had to be eradicated. And what really bothered me about it was that I didn't see it for so long. And so when I teach intro to philosophy in particular, some of my students over here, I feel obligated to read writings based on Native American indigenous religions and to look at these worldviews and how people understood themselves. And there's a great deal of value and interest in all of this, to look at how we think of things like we all have to have private property and we all need to find a job, and religion is something different and separate from regular life, earning a living and so forth. Think of nature as something given to us in this European tradition. And these are not beliefs that indigenous traditions hold in general. So I wish I would have respected humanity and other people more, that I tried to understand and trying to understand it now, but I didn't do it when I should have probably. So these are some pictures of stuff that I do, and I wanted to talk about the idea. So my title is a little unusual. Becoming who you are. It's meant to be kind of ungrammatical, not to make complete sense, because why would it be a problem if you already were who you were, right? Don't you just naturally exist as the person you are all the time? So within philosophy of mind and personal identity, the idea of who you are becomes problematic. Who is it that you actually are? How do you know you're making the right decisions? How do you fulfill dreams, if it means anything to say that this happens? I don't pretend to know. But I do think that there are, despite how mysterious these things can be, there are ways to become something more than what you thought you were, to be somebody who can listen to other people, to understand them, to ask questions, to push them in various directions. And ultimately, you're the only one who can do this. So here I'm talking about a number of ways. I wish I had a better, more technical, philosophical term for this, but these are ways in which I stretch myself to being something other than I am. There actually is a philosophical term for this. Nietzsche talks about it. This is sort of like self-transcendence. I'm sort of becoming something more than what I thought I could. So I list some things here. I'm from northern Minnesota, so I play hockey. I like to think I'm better than I ever was. That's almost certainly false. In some ways, this is my rage against the dying of the light. I don't want to get old, so I keep trying. I am happy to say that a bunch of people are here who I play music with, which is a very rewarding thing. And I'm not going to play audio of myself playing music, because then you'd really be disappointed in me. But the idea that this is something you have in you that you can cultivate, and unlike hockey, you can actually get better at music as you get older, until you get really old, and then maybe it falls off the page. I also found very great value in learning to speak foreign languages. So ironically, when I was an engineer, I went to my advisor and I said, I want to learn foreign languages. And he said, no, don't do that. Wasting your time. It'll take you 2 more years to get out in the world and make money. So don't do it. And I was like, okay, that seems like sound advice. And when I was an engineer, I actually programmed some room pressure controllers for the French, German, and Swedish markets. And someone once said, if only we had somebody who knew these languages and wanted to make little menus in those languages, that would be fantastic. And I said, well, I'll do that. I want to learn how to speak these languages. So they paid for me to learn French and German. And I went to grad school before I could learn Swedish, which is really sad. But anyway, so I got into that in a kind of through the back door. But that's been a great part of my sense of self. And I enjoy going to the German-speaking part of the world where I have friends and things I can do, and it's a whole nother version of me. Doesn't exist for as long, but it's there. That's a case of stretching. Whereas if I lived there for a year or so and I could speak really well and effortlessly, that wouldn't be nearly as interesting as trying to muck my way through it. I'm also I'm addicted to fixing things, fixing cars and working on things, solving puzzles. This is the engineer side of me that didn't die off, sort of like when they're identical twins, but one of them remains in a homuncular form. So, but it's more than a homunculus. It's a big thing. And I also find that this is true with friendships in a way, where I have people I know, people I grew up with, and they remember things about me that I've forgotten or repressed. Maybe the things didn't actually happen. I'm not sure. But I like to be able to stretch myself into the past and remember things that otherwise I would forget. I should also say, I meant to put this on the slide, but in the last year, My wife and I in the last 19 months, we've fostered 19 animals. So I've gotten very into this. It's a very rewarding thing. And again, it's not as hard as I would have thought. And it's very valuable. And I like the sort of the dignity and individuality of animals. I think it's very healthy. So that's another stretch that I forgot to list. Okay, so and then this is my last life lesson I'll foist upon you. This one's depressing. I'm convinced that the way that we're moving as a species is to certain doom and annihilation, and not too long of a time. And I think this is almost like with personal death. Like I might think, yeah, I've heard about this death thing. It seems to be a reality, but somehow or other, I'm gonna find a way. I'm gonna weasel through this, and I'll keep existing. That's what my will says, but my understanding says, no, it's not going to happen. You are going to, like every other person who's ever existed in history, you're going to be annihilated. It's going to happen. And Nietzsche talks about this, and he says this is actually kind of a good thing. If you think about it, that life is finite and you only have one life to live, and you have to either you say yes to that, or there's nothing you can say yes to. That way, this adds meaning to things that you only get at once. I don't feel so sanguine about annihilation of Earth in the same kind of way. This seems to me like a mistake, that an inability to make the right decisions, to prioritize things, to think about what really is valuable, what's irreplaceable, and to try to somehow stop it. So in my philosophy of science class, I'd often present this thought experiment where we'd go several centuries into the future after humanity has completely destroyed the entire Earth and it's biologically dead. And these enlightened aliens would come here. They would say, well, what happened there? And if they were really preternaturally good historians, they might be able to figure out that there was life on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. And then all of a sudden, this one species showed up and started causing all kinds of problems. And they got a certain idea, this idea of scientific mastery of the world. And that idea accelerated entire world into its death throes, eventually. That's a very depressing narrative, but I think it's probably true that this is how people will look back on it, if there were people to look back on it, which there won't. So what will it be? What will cause the end of us all? Will it be climate change that goes unchecked? Even if people tried to check it, maybe it's too late to fix it. The acidification of the oceans, extinction of many, many species, which won't come back. In Jared Diamond's Collapse, he goes on a trip to Haiti, and one of the people says, I thought the world would end in like a nuclear holocaust, but we might end up just all getting buried in garbage. That could be how it happens. Garbage is a human-created problem. Since World War II, this is a decision we've made economically. Never get out of it. I talk about this when I go back to northern Minnesota. I can go out in the middle of the woods and I can dig down in the leaves and the pine needles, and I don't find any trash. I go anywhere in New Jersey and I dig down, I'll find remnants of human packaging, human activity. This frightens me. We could have a nuclear holocaust. I mean, that could happen. I think there's every probability that will be the ending. At how politics is going right now. And even if it was going better, we're leaving it up to human frailty to make the right decisions about these things. So if you have a certain potential for this to happen in a long window of time, it's inevitable. So maybe we can just hope for quantum heat death, but we'd be extinct long before that happens too. So, yes, so this is very depressing, and I feel like this is something we ought not to think about as just science fiction, dystopian musings, but this is probably our reality. Okay, so I only have a little bit left. Let me just check my timing. Okay, so I'm actually doing better than I thought. I have a little audio visual, and then I have another slide after this. So this is a piece I rather like. This is from Orson Welles' F for Fake, that maybe the apocalypse won't be so bad after all. So here goes. So this is about 2 minutes.
Now this has been standing here for centuries. The premier work of man, perhaps, in the whole Western world. And it's without a signature. Chartres. A celebration to God's glory and to the dignity of man. Well, all that's left, most artists seem to feel these days, is man. Naked. Poor, forked radish. There aren't any celebrations. Ours, the scientists keep telling us, is a universe which is disposable. You know, it might be just this one anonymous glory of all things. This rich stone forest, this epic chant, this gaiety, this grand choiring shout of affirmation, which we choose when all our cities are dust, to stand intact, to mark where we have been, to testify to what we had it in us to accomplish. Our works in stone, in paint, in print are spared, some of them for a few decades or a millennium or two, but everything must finally fall in war or wear away into the ultimate and universal ash. The triumphs and the frauds, the treasures and the fakes, a fact of life. We're going to die. Be of good heart. Cry the dead artists out of the living past. Our songs will all be silenced. But what of it? Go on singing. Maybe a man's name doesn't matter all that much.
Okay, so so I just wanted to say another word or two about the piece I just played there. So I think that we tend to believe that technology will save us. There will be some way somebody finds to reverse all the problems, keep us around. And I think this is a siren song. It's seductive, but ultimately false. John Dewey's idea back in the 30s is correct. He said our capacity to develop new technology will always outstrip our sense of its social consequences. So all the things that we create are supposed to make things better, might make a little something better, but they make a lot of other things a whole lot worse. And that in some ways this is an arms race that we're destined to lose. So, and I don't have any answers for this, but I think it's something important for us to think about, to be aware of. Okay, so let me just close, hopefully on a sort of a positive note, if I can muster it. So this slide is very dear to me. It shows places I've traveled, friends of mine, my family, things that I think I'll ultimately remember. long into what's, hopefully quite a bit of life left to me. But these are the important things. And I was glad that I was part of it. I was glad that I had the experience of it. The image left is one that I cherish. This is the view from my old deer stand up in northern Minnesota. And it's a godforsaken slough. You can only walk there when it's frozen, which is about half the year. And I remember going there, and I would look out, and I would look at all the grass and watch this boring sort of frozen nature, and I would think about things. And I would go there from year to year for many years, and I would remember who I was some years beforehand. And so I feel like there's something about places where we are also that's very significant. This is another part of our Western culture that I think is sort of bad. Move away from all that. We don't respect how we are part of the world in this particular kind of way. So anyway, I'll come back to this idea that the only way, as Nietzsche said, we can really be who we are is to will to do it again if we could. And I think the highest affirmation you can give to your life is that you would choose it again, even if you acknowledge that some parts of it maybe weren't ideal, but ultimately it was all worth it. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for presenting. It was really great. And as a token of our appreciation, we want to present you with this. Yeah.